So yeah, I'm just going to do my presentation today on foundation training, starting, breaking in, whatever you want to call it. We try and not use the words breaking in because of the negative connotations with that word. However, just starting the horse for its career under saddle. And I'm going to show you, I know there's a lot of ways to break in, and there's a lot of very good ways. I've tried quite a few ways, but this way here using learning theory I've found is a very fast and efficient and safe way to break, or as safe as breaking in a horse can be, or as safe as starting a horse can be, which is not very safe sometimes. But I want to just talk you through what we would do using learning theory to back a horse for the first time and then leading on to its further training. You'll notice in the 10 principles of ISES that are written into your notes from this weekend that one of the things we want to do is to try and eliminate flight in the horse. So I used to break in with some kind of round pen technique or lunging. Like for me, there's two sort of schools of thought. You're either in the join up, round pen, chase the horse one, or you're in the lunging, side reins, tying its head down sort of a one, or you're somewhere in between or somewhere completely different. But those are the two main standard ways to break in. And once I'd learned about the flight response and how it's stored in a part of the brain that can never be erased, I started to realise that chasing a flight animal is probably not that good for its mental health. And that didn't take me long. I mean, it took me a long time to understand that because no one had ever told me and put it that way. But as soon as they did, I thought, yep, okay, no more chasing horses. And it's hard for me as a dressage rider because when we get a good moving foal or yearling or 2-year-old, we put it out on the arena to get a video with a bit of a plastic bag and teach it to trot fancy to try and sell it. And I'm trying not to do that, but that's very hard, but I'm also trying to make a living. But yeah, definitely no, at least we're using as low a stimulus as we can, and the horse has got a lot of freedom. But there are certainly some horses I would never, ever do that to. So now I break in a round pen. This is obviously not an ideal space to be backing a horse for the first time. However, as you've already seen, the lovely Mustang, his name's Mustang, hopefully by name and not so much by nature, is actually an already broken in horse. We didn't want to bring an unbroken horse in here because the potential for things to go wrong and to damage the horse's future is quite great. So we're just doing this today with a broken in horse. It's not cheating, it's just a way to show you as quickly as we can the system that we use. So yeah, we've got a system going here where we don't chase the horse. I'm working normally in a round pen because it's a nice, safe, small area. And a good thing about in a round pen is that the environment tends to not change. What you're trying to do with the horse is form habits in his brain so that basically every time you press a button you get a correct answer. And if your environment keeps changing, even out in my big dressage arena, there's always a scary end. Everyone's arena has a scary end. This is probably C, same as at my place. And something will happen down here, and then there's trees in that bit, and the sunshine in that bit, and the shadows over here. Whereas a round pen tends to be a fairly stable environment. Mine's got nice high sides, so really nothing changes until my dad drives up and like pops his head up over the side or the cat comes. So that's important that I've got an area that's a pretty consistent area to train the horse in for its early training, and somewhere where it can't get too far away if there is a small disaster. And then I also wanted to talk about the reasons we don't lunge and long rein as well. So I'll probably do that as part of this talk. I'll try and fit it in or in the questions at the end. So what you're trying to do when you're foundation training or starting a horse is you need it to, if you think of what is it I need it to do under saddle, I need it to be able to start and stop or go faster and slow down and turn left and right. And then a little bit later on I might also need to be able to yield this animal's hindquarters. So those are the very basic things we need. We also need to habituate the horse to a rider on its back and to a saddle on its back. So those are the critical things we're actually trying to do in the breaking in process. A lot of other things we do on top of that, for instance lunging and long reining, aren't actually necessary. We've often just done them because that's what you do when you break in a horse. It has to be long reined or it has to be lunged, when in actual fact it doesn't at all. So if habituation to the rider is the first thing I want the horse to be able to do, before I just throw my cheerful assistant Emily on board, I'm going to need to make sure I've got control of the horse's legs. This system we use, it can be a two-person job or a one-person job. I'm a female, and most of the girls working for me are girls. So we try and do it as a two-person job. It's safe, it's fast, it's efficient, but you certainly can do it for yourself if you're in a small enough area. But I like to make it a two-person job for the first few days, and after that, you can go on your own. So what I want to do before I throw Emily on to habituate is I've got to have control of the horse's legs. So I need to have a way here on the ground that I can control him in case he shows some flight response to having a rider on his back. So what we do first, I'll just lead him up a little bit, is just a little bit of groundwork to make sure I've got control. So if this horse came to me for breaking in, of course it always depends on how much handling the horse has done. In general, I get given horses, they've already had a rug on, they've been on a trailer to get to you, they've had some amount of handling. They're not straight and off the hills or off the range like you might find. So they've had a little bit of a handling on them. I generally put a bridle on them straight away to give myself more control. However, I'm perfectly happy to break it in bridleless or in a head collar, rope head collar, normal head collar, or in a bitless bridle. So I'm not saying you need a bit, but you do need control. And for me, because the horses are always going to be ridden in a bit from then on in, I just start on the first day putting a bit in the mouth. And I teach the horse what he needs to know about the bit. So I teach him that when I press on his mouth, he has to step back to the pressure. And when you first put a bit in a naive horse's mouth, they tend to do a lot of mouthing, a lot of chewing, try and get their tongue over the bit. I don't worry about that too much. I try and have the bit at a point in his mouth where he's not going to get his tongue over. But just by consistently teaching him that the bit will go away when I slow him down, actually stops all of that tongue movement and teeth chattering and all of that mouth open things that the horse may do. It might take 1 or 2 sessions, but what you don't actually need to do is mouth the horse as such. I used to put the bit in, leave it in the stable with wearing a bridle for days at a time and have maybe a special mouthing bit. You don't actually need to do that as long as you teach the horse how to get rid of bit pressure. So I start off by teaching him, and again, if he's learnt it in the head collar first, it makes it a lot easier. So if I've taught him that with the head collar to step back and I'll release, then it's not too much of a leap of faith for him to understand that pressure on his mouth means release. And then I also make sure that pressure on his mouth forward gets me a signal to put him forward. Most of you guys will know, though, that this rein pressure is not always enough if the horse is going to try and get away from you or not come forward. So I need a way to make my signal a little bit louder, and that's when the whip comes in. So the whip for me is not a tool to punish the horse. It's just a way of using negative reinforcement on parts of his body that I can't reach normally. So if I want to touch his hindquarters, it's a lot safer for me to stay at the front and be able to tap his hindquarters than do it with my actual body going down there with my hand. So I always make sure the horse is habituated to the whip, just touching him. And when I had a little look at this guy earlier on, he was a little bit worried about the whip being back on him, but he's good now. If he's at all worried and lifts his head up or shows any form of flight, I'm going to step him back as I do it. So that's kind of my anti-flight device, if you like. So a little bit of overshadowing there where I say, hey, don't worry about the whip, just step back and then it'll go away. So the whip has to be a neutral stimulus for the horse. Whip touching must mean nothing at all. There's not many horses we break in that are actually scared of the whip. They're just naive to it. What happens to make a horse scared to the whip, as Gemma was talking with her needle shy horses, it's that they've learnt that moving quickly removes the whip, and very quickly you can end up with a horse that appears to have been beaten, and all that's really happened is it's learnt to move away and then escalated that behaviour. So people often say to me, oh, someone's really been hitting this horse with the whip. Look, you lift the whip and he runs away. But that's not necessarily the case. And there's not many people out there that actually actively whip horses from on the ground. So it's more likely that he's just learnt to get rid of the whip touching him by moving. So once I know that the whip is a neutral stimulus, I give him a couple of signals to do with the whip. So I teach him that a whip tap here on his chest means step back. Or I can use it down on his front leg here to step back. If I'm going to use it on the front leg, I use it on whichever leg is furthest forward, because biomechanically that is going to be the one that's going to take that first step back. It's a little unfair if I tap the right front leg here now for a step back when it's the left that's going to be actually making that first step. Good boy. So yeah, just getting a whip tap. I normally train in sets of 3, so if he gives me 3 good responses in a row or 3 improved responses, he gets a little break. And he told me he needed one. He just did a big breath then. So I need to have a whip tap to step him back in case when I go to put the rider on board, he starts to freeze up a little bit. I don't want to have to be too loud on his mouth, especially with a naive horse. A little bit different when you're retraining a horse that's already had high mouth pressures, but you have to remember with these guys, they've never been subjected to mouth pressure. So it's not as simple with your negative reinforcement as just escalating a pressure till you get the right answer, because these guys don't know the right answer. So we try and keep our pressures really, really low. And we just teach them here, the whip tap is just another way to step you back. And I'll repeat that again. We'll get 3 of those in a row. Good boy. Good. And then I teach him that a whip tap on his side, and I'm using it here on his right-hand side, but I can equally use it here on the left, that if I tap him there, the answer is to walk forward. And you do find when you're backing some horses like this, we say they were born broken in. It's like they just happened to give me the right answer, and I reward that right answer. Luckily for me, he hasn't trialled any of the other possible responses, of which there are a huge amount. We've got bucking, rearing, running forward, biting, pawing, trying to lie down. Like, I've pretty much seen all of them. And what your job to do is, as the trainer of the horse, is just to try and only reward the behaviour that you want. So if he starts pawing the ground, when I do that, I just keep tapping, say, no, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. That's the one that I want. So by negatively reinforcing the correct answer, he starts to really understand what it is that makes the whip tap go away. So really it's a little bit like a computer when you open the file menu at the top. In that drop-down menu, you only want there to be one answer for the horse. When there's more than one possible answer, you get confusion. So right from the beginning, some horses only ever choose one answer, and that's the only one that was ever rewarded, and they've learnt that right from the beginning. Other horses, you spend a fair amount of time sifting through all the incorrect answers, and a few of them you may have to really tell the horse, no, that one is definitely not appropriate, and then keep rewarding that answer that you want. So what makes a horse really calm is knowing the answer to all of these pressure questions that you give to him. So pressure on whip tap on the side for go forward, the same as leg pressure on the side is going to be go forward. Pressure on his mouth means step back. Once he's got all of those sorted in his brain and has those neural pathways really well wired, then he's going to be a calm and obedient horse. So that's all I would normally do, is just check I've got a couple of signals for forward and a couple for back, so that if he starts to get it all worried, I'm able to ramp up the pressure a little bit with the whip aid if needed. And then I'll also teach the horse to park. So I want to be able to step away from him and have my legs not mean move. Now this is quite different from a lot of natural horsemanship techniques where moving your feet and body language actually signals the horse to go. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you can be very, very consistent with it. And the issue with it that I have is, for instance, if I teach him to follow my feet and he does that every single time, then when I walk him onto the trailer, tie him up and leave, I've just changed the rules. And one of the ISIS principles there that we learnt about the other day and have been learning about these last 3 days is that whatever your signal is, it must only have one response attached to it. So you can't have feet moving, sometimes meaning move and sometimes not meaning move. So for me, it's much clearer to the horse that even if I dance a jig here and run off and go get a coffee and come back, that it's nothing to do with him. So I don't want him actually responding to my body language. I just want him responding to cues. And for some, where my cues are, it might be a voice aid, it might be the rein aid, or it might be a whip tap aid on his side. And for me, that keeps a horse a lot calmer. It's kind of like he's in neutral right now because I'm not doing anything. So anything I'm doing with my body, I don't want him to even notice until I give him the signal. You don't want your horse on such high alert that it's like, oh, I think she's moving there. Oh no, oh no, we're going to turn here. And it can make some horses, particularly higher bred, more finely bred horses, can make them really nervous. It's a big source of confusion to the horse. So I would rather teach the horse not to move until told to move. Now this guy hasn't necessarily been taught that, although he's not much of a follower. But what I did notice with him is that when I go to move around the back of him, that's been taught to him as a signal to come up. I would normally, if I was presented with a horse for breaking in for dressage, show jumping, eventing, I would train that out of him. I don't particularly want to train it out of him here in case his lovely owners have been so generous to bring him along here, actually use that as a cue, because maybe it's useful in a different sport, but for me it's really not useful because I want to be able to walk around the back of the horse and do up the back boot or go to the tail or do whatever, and this guy's like, that means face up, that means face up. And so for me, I'd rather say, no, I can move around there. So he's learned that through classical conditioning, that my feet moving are an actual signal. So the way I would get rid of that is to just bit by bit, every time he makes a mistake with his feet, step him back. And there'll be a real trigger point. English riding horses sometimes do this as well if we've been really lazy at lunging them. You know that when you half get them out and they just kind of go forward. And so whenever you step into lunging position, they've already left. But to make the horse really calm, you want to be able to switch off all the signals. So I want to be able to, bit by bit, come around this side, and if he moves, I'll just step him back a little and go to him and give him a little stroke, and I'll try and find that trigger place and work through that trigger until I can get right around him. So for me, it shouldn't matter what my body posture is saying. And I'm not saying horses can't read body language. They're awesome at it. But when I sell this horse on to a client and they're like, I can't make it stand still, and down the phone I'm like, I think you probably need to drop your left shoulder and avert your vision slightly, and you need to be in a that's really hard to describe. Like, what if I've got a sore back and I happen to want to be walking like that? To me it's just easier to say, hey dude, it's nothing to do with you. If I want you to move, I'll actually tell you to with a proper signal. So if you can put that on a voice aid, totally awesome. If you can put it on an aid that is only used for that, then that's really good. So that in itself can be a source of confusion for the horse. So always remember, one signal, one response. If you want the horse to always move around like that when you step that way, great. If there's going to be times when that's not useful, then you're going to need to put it on a different cue that isn't your feet. And remember that whole walking into the trailer analogy, that if you're going to walk onto a trailer, tie it up and leave, it certainly can't follow your feet then. So to be really fair to the animal, you've got to make sure that everything's repeatable. So I would normally make sure the horse can park, and then I would bring in my trusty assistant, Emily, who's going to be doing the laying over. So really all we need to do on that very first day is check we've got brakes, check we've got a way to move the horse forward and back, and a way to make the horse park so the feet don't move. If it's a horse that's also a little bit on high alert, I might also teach him, back up, a little head down cue, so a little wiggle under here to get him to lower his head, because the lower I can bring his head, the more he's going to relax. It's going to lower his blood pressure, lower his heart rate, and cause him to relax. So that's definitely one that's worth thinking about even at this very early stage of breaking in, and I certainly wouldn't be jumping on him if his feet were still but his head was right up. I'd be thinking, oh no, he's on high alert, we better do some more relaxation. But generally in that very first day we'll be doing the laying over, which is what we're going to show you now. So we break it down into steps. We don't just leg Emily up and yee-haw and just see what happens. It's a very carefully controlled situation. You might ask why we're getting on bareback. There's quite a few reasons for that, but one of them is horses value touch so much, and it's something that particularly in English riding we haven't been taught to value. So we only ever get on the horse with a saddle on. We either lunge it or we're on board. There's always some sort of interface between us and the horse, a saddle blanket or a saddle or whatever. And then when the horse is good, we've been taught to smack it with our hand, which is apparently rewarding for the horse. Although I've yet to meet a naive horse that actually likes being slapped. So it is actually an aversive for the horse doing that, and you actually have to train it not to care. You have to habituate it to you slapping it, and then somehow use slapping as a reward. And that's seen so often, and that's one thing, you know, we could really change in equestrian culture if we start to say, no, don't hit your horse with your hand, give them a rub. That's what horses actually like. So when you get on them bareback first, you can be really close to the horse, skin on skin type thing. You can feel parts of the horse with your legs and with your body that you cannot reach with a saddle. So it's really good for habituation. It makes the horses much calmer, and they don't have to worry about girth pressure, because girth pressure is one of the things that some horses really struggle to habituate to. And when you see it from a horse's point of view, it's quite crazy. We want them to habituate fully to a girth here, but be ultra sensitive to a rider's leg, like a centimetre back. Like, that's just so hard. And some just can't do it, and they're normally in the rodeo or no longer with us. So it's a big thing for the horse. But we've found getting on them bareback, which is traditional in some cultures, but really not traditional in many other horse cultures around the world, keeps the horse calm, allows that touch, allows you to get off quickly if you need to. So when I'm doing this on my own and the horse starts getting a bit bucky, I just slide my leg and I'm like halfway off going, oh, that's good, slide back on again, rather than being caught in the tack with a saddle on. So remember, one of the things we're trying to do is start this horse with no signs of the flight response at all. We're really trying to minimize flight, maximize relaxation every step of the way. So next we get Emily in, and the first thing we normally do is get her just to touch him here and then to jump up and down while I overshadow that. So I'm just saying to him, hey buddy, don't worry about her, just listen to me. Don't worry about her, just listen to me. Good, that's great. And I can feel, even if I closed my eyes, I can feel his care factor, as I would call it in New Zealand, how much he's worried about Emily by how heavy he feels in my hand. So I don't even need to be watching. I can just be like, oh, he's not happy. If he's really worried, I'm not going to be able to move him at all. He might be like rooted to the spot. And I often see people make that mistake. They're like, oh, he's really happy. Look, he's not even moving. But you can guarantee the first time he does, it's not going to be a nice small step. He could be launching. So he could be frozen to the spot. So I want to be able to move his feet. And it's a process of habituation that we use called overshadowing that Andrew was talking about earlier. Great. And then we just do the same again. So I'm doing this until I can feel that he's just as light to lead as what he was when Emily wasn't jumping up and down. And we're already at that stage with him. So with him, like I say, he is a broken-in horse. We're cheating slightly. But some horses are really cool with that, just depending on how much handling they've had in the past and experiences. Other horses, that might be a 10-minute job just to get to that stage. Stage 2 is I'm going to leg Emily up. And 1, 2, 3, that's it. Never good to do straight after lunch, so Emily drew the short straw. And again, I'm going to step him back first, not forward, because backing him up is kind of my anti-buck, if you like. He's less likely to buck going backwards. Good boy. That's it. And again, I just check, can I move you there? Can I move you forward? And I make sure his steps forward are very small steps. Good. And once he feels fine with that, and I can check also, I can overshadow him a little bit, or at least check the habituation level by lowering the head there. So if I put my head down command on and he listens to me, I know he doesn't care about her hanging around there like a monkey. It's a great view. If anyone wants to take a photo, now's a good time. Okay, so step 3 is one leg up on the horse's back. And this is where I first start to feel that the horse doesn't particularly like that. So when I went to step him back, he opened his mouth and he resisted stepping back with his feet. So I just worked through that and I say, hey buddy, I know it's scary, but you need to move back. Good. And again, if I need to, I can increase the rein pressure a bit with the whip, but I actually don't need to. He's pretty light, this guy, but I could definitely sense that he didn't think that was that great to have Emily laying over him. because he just was heavy to that step back. Good. So once he's nice and light to that, I might do a few steps forward. And again, if he shows any form of flight, like a quick step forward, I'm going to stop him straight away. The worst thing that can happen, really, is that he leaps forward and gets rid of Emily. If she was to fall off, I always say fall off and stay very close to him, because the more he can remove her, the more rewarding that behaviour is. So we try and not let him get any distance away and not have fast legs. Good. So 2 legs up. This is what we call planking. It's always great for photos. And again, I just check. So what we find once you've done this with a horse, he's actually really good with lots of other things, like a rug on him, or if you're having to put your long coat on over the top of him. He's had all of the stuff here on his back, and they seem to be able to, he's slippery, to generalise and really not worry about too much else. This for a horse, for some horses, this is a really big deal. For others, not so much. Good, and then legs down. So we're just trying to set up really good associations, good. And we probably should be doing a little more rubbing than we are. It's hard because he's not particularly nervous. I'm not using as much rubbing as I would normally do. But normally on the very first day of backing, we'll have the rider up like this, and we might do it 2 or 3 times. And the session might be a half-hour session or a 25-minute session, but normally no longer than that. So all we're trying to do is say, hey, buddy, that person on your back is a neutral stimulus, so it doesn't matter at all that they're up there. Great. Okay, so we'll get Emily down, and I'm going to move along quickly. The next thing we would do is teach the horse, I'll do it in a slightly different order. I'm going to teach him to turn here from on the ground. So a turn, like we heard earlier, is actually an abduction of the inside front foot. Bending the neck and spinning the bum around, or the hind legs around, isn't a correct turn and actually has a fair amount of flight associated with it. So right from the very beginning, I do not want a horse that's going to be trained for dressage or jumping to learn to bend his neck from a rein aid, okay? There's never a moment in a dressage or jumping test where bending your neck off the centre line, off the midline of your horse is a valuable experience for him. So right from the beginning, I might just put that whip down there on the ground. Good fella. So I can teach him here on the ground. And I'll just walk with him a little bit because this might confuse him a bit with one of his backup cues, that if I open this rein, he's to open that leg, or that I open this rein and he opens that leg. So he actually turns quite nicely there. And I'll just stay with him here because when he's backing up. If I was to stop my legs when he was backing up, he'd be teaching me through negative reinforcement that I go away. Good boy. When he backs up. So I don't want that to happen. And again here. Good. So he's showing a really good turn response there. And you might think, oh, that's just because he's already been broken in. But I can guarantee you that probably 90% of dressage and jumping horses don't give that response. They bend their neck, they spin their butt, they stand still and do nothing, they lean on the bit, or they come rounder. It's really important. We'll just grab that. That's cool. Really important that whatever you teach the horse first, he tends to learn the deepest, especially when it comes to negative reinforcement. One of the ways I learned to break in the past, the very first thing you did was, get the horse used to a saddle, put side reins on, and teach the horse before you're ever even on its back that rein pressure goes away when your nose comes in. And that's really, really typical. I hear people saying the most important thing is that the horse is round right from the get-go. If he never learns to have his head up, he'll never do it, as if having the head up is the worst possible thing, above bucking and all the other bad things a horse could do. But whatever happens, just don't let it lift its head. So for me, we leave the head totally alone until we have the feet completely under control, and that just makes good sense. I don't want the horse, when something's going wrong and I have to woo on him to stop him and save my life, I don't want him to go, rounder, rounder was the answer. I want him to go, stop my feet is the only answer I know. So that's really critical, and a lot of my retraining of dressage horses, they've learnt that the reins mean roundness rather than slow down your feet. or they've learned that one rein means bend your neck rather than turn your feet. So you're ending up riding this thing that all the reins do is make the neck do things, and there's really no control of the feet. So the horse learns to shy, learns it can get away, it learns it can speed up, and then snowballing a lot of problem behaviours from that. So really important. It does not need its head down. In fact, most of the time when I'm breaking them in, I'm trying to encourage their heads up, because you'll fall off a lot less when its head's up there than when it's down there. And just teaching it to be really open in the gullet and stop really, really smoothly. Great, okay, so we're going to leg Emily up. This would normally be day 2, maybe 3 of breaking in. Good boy. And I'm just going to show you how we then transfer my signals onto Emily so she can start riding the horse. Good, we'll go on 3. 1, 2, 3. So we spend a couple of days just laying over quietly, and then we start to go, right, buddy, you know my signal. If I press back there, it means slow down. If I pull forward here, it means go. And I've got the whip here if I need, if he gets a little bit sticky, which again, this guy's not going to do. Then Emily's going to use the leg aid. We've kind of pre-trained that aid. Good boy. Because that's in the same zone where I've been tapping with the whip. So he's got hopefully some idea that leg pressure might mean go. He might need further habituation to the leg if he's really sensitive, and we try and not let Emily take her leg off too soon, or he could start to get really jumpy. So she just gives him a squeeze or a little tappity tap with the leg, and we could use a voice cue at the same time. That's it. Now, if the horse didn't get it, if he just stood there going, I haven't got a clue, that's really annoying, I'd give him a bit of a hint if you like. I know I'm not using very scientific terms. That's because I'm not a scientist. But basically, I'm just giving him a little cue here with the reins going, hey, remember that, you know what this one means, buddy. And he realises that Emily's legs go away as well as the rein pressure going away when he walks forward. So we start to transfer the signals he already knows onto a brand new set of signals through a process we call classical conditioning. So he starts to realise, but of course with him, he's already doing a walk forward, albeit a little vigorously. Good, and then Emily can try a step back, so she just touches, good boy, both sides of his mouth. And again, if he didn't get that, I'd help him out a little with my lead rope there until they both meant the same thing. We basically phase out the person on the ground until the person on board's got the control. Then if you want to do some left and right turns with him, because we're just going to move on really quickly or we're going to run out of time. Good. So already, good boy. Ooh, there's a fella. So he starts to learn to open his leg to get rid of the rein pressure. Oh, good boy, that's it. And just try and be a little soft one. He's a big reactor, that's it. So the reins start at the very beginning to control the front feet. I get sent horses, and it's a really common thing. They're what's called green broke, which to me means they're okay with the saddle, they're okay with the rider, they kind of go and they kind of stop, but they have zero steering. So you get on them somewhere here and they're just like they're drunk. They're kind of walking all around the place. The trouble with breaking them in with no steering from the beginning is that they learn to avoid things. So they learn that, I don't have to go near the letter R, and I don't have to go up that end, and I definitely don't have to go over there. So the more a horse learns to avoid things, the more scared of those objects the horse becomes. So you're actually setting him up to be a shyer or to be afraid of things right from the beginning. Instead of being able to come out into an arena like this, the horse says, I don't think I can go there, and you just wait a second, and then you lift his foot and go, oh no, you're good, your foot does come near there, and off you go. So it might be pretty rudimentary steering, but I don't think it's fair on the animal to bring it, start to ride it around with no steering. The hardest part isn't getting him used to a rider or the saddle. Often it's teaching him to steer and not run away and not shy away from things. So steering right from the beginning for me is a really, really important thing. Right, we're going to whip Emily off, and we're going to quickly put the saddle on, because I appreciate we're going to start running out of time. So normally we would, all things being equal, and if we were only doing one training session a day on the horse, because sometimes we can, particularly working around things like the weather, we might do an early morning session and then an afternoon session. We'll often have the saddle on about day 4 or 5. The more tense the horse, the longer we'll keep riding them bareback, even if we're going all over the farm, all over the property, and we just keep them bareback till they're really, really happy before we ever put the saddle on. Good, we can go. After he's had the rider on board, you don't normally have to do that whole stroke him with the saddle cloth thing. Actually, none of mine, and mine have never been rugged before I break them in. They normally just really don't worry. They've already had a rider on board and laid all over them, so this piece of material is generally not an issue. So I can normally put it straight on, but if the horse shows any form of fear or flight, I'll just step him back at the same time. And of course, we would do this as much as we can from both sides. I'm just doing a very quick job of it here. That's good. And again, with the saddle going on, I'll just go the same side as Emily in case he tries to worry. Again, I've never had a horse after we've been riding around bareback that ever cares about the saddle being on his back, because it's probably less scary than one of us laying right over him. However, we're now adding the girth, which can cause a lot of issues. I'm very, very careful the first time we put the girth on the horse that we don't, we really, really try and not frighten the horse. It takes a lot of undoing once the horse has learnt to be frightened of the girth. So we might just get Emily just to hold the girth up on him there, and she can just have a little bit of pressure there as we just say, are you okay with that? And are you okay there? So again, using overshadowing, I can feel that he doesn't mind that. And then we'll do it up tight enough that it won't slip if he tries to do anything, but actually still what some people would describe as fairly loose. I'd also normally at this stage be on the lead rope, or have these, on the reins, or have the reins tucked up out of the way. Stepping him back, yeah, so they can probably go up one more. Before I let him go, and I'm not going to do that today, by the way, to experience having girth pressure on, I want to do as much as possible to make sure he's not going to have a bad experience. So I'll be overshadowing that. The other thing I sometimes do is stick my fingers in here under the girth, and I say, and are you still okay with that? Because a lot of horses that are actually riding horses, they might be good show jumpers, high-level competition horses, they're cold-backed, and you'll notice that although they're kind of okay with the girth and the saddle, the moment you increase that pressure by making a bit more of a gnarly pressure under there, they're really not okay. And that's often what happens when you first get on a riding horse and it tries to buck or bronc, and we say it's cold-backed or whatever. It's because it's actually not properly habituated to the girth. So that's a little trick I learnt along the way. Fingers under the girth on both sides and make sure he's really good with that. To shape it in properly, you would have no stirrups on, but I often just do it all in the same session. I'll pull these stirrups down, and again, I'll teach the horse that when I tap, tap, tap like that, he's still got to step forward and he's still got to step back. This is going to feel really weird. He's probably hoping we're not going to turn him into a dressage horse. It's like, no, I'll do gates. Don't worry about that. So again, I want to make sure I'd be stepping him forward and back and forward and back, and he does find that certainly at least mildly aversive. So I'd get him really used to that. Before then, I would normally have them out on the end of a lunge line and actually put them out. Although they haven't learned to lunge, I'm in a round pen, so it's not too much of a difficulty, and I'll get them to walk and then trot around the round pen, and at any sign, because they could still buck once they're really moving with it on. I've done all my pre-flight checks, if you like. I've got him as good as I can without getting him moving. I'll get him trotting, but the instant he tries to run or leap or buck, I'll stop him as quickly as I can so he doesn't get to practice that flight behavior. Remembering every time you let him practice flight, it's being embedded in his brain, and it's going to be very, very hard to train over. So we want to make sure he just doesn't have any bad experiences along the way. Once he's used to the saddle and he's trotting happily around with that saddle on, we then normally just put the rider on. So you're just adding one-on-one. He's good with the saddle, he's good with the rider, he already knows all his signals because you've taught him everything in bareback. And then we just put the rider on with the saddle, go for a bit of a ride around the farm. By the next day, they're normally in the arena, and normally cantering on about the 8th or 9th day that they've ever had anything to do with the starting process. So we throw them in at the deep end a little bit. I find we take them to the beach about the day after that, and all my girls are like, no way, the beach already? But I find that they're still really listening to you at that stage. I'd rather take a breaker to the beach and get it used to everything than take a 7-year-old, 17 one-hand-high dressage warm blood that's never been to the beach before. That's not my idea of fun, because they're big and strong and they're probably already pretty confused on their signals. They've learnt to shorten their necks and get heavy and things, whereas these guys, when they're first broken in, they are so light and so sensitive because we haven't managed to wreck them along the way. Training horses is not easy, and trying to get a horse to keep it as light as it can be, as light as it was when you first broke it in, is a very, very difficult job, particularly in the sports of dressage and jumping where you're riding on a contact. So yeah, that's probably all I wanted to show for that. I can give you a 2-minute sermon on why not to use long reins if you want to hear it. Yeah, you do, because that's one of the things people always ask me, and I'm going to do a really bad Irish accent here, Ola. I teach a lot in Ireland and in Northern Ireland where they think it's impossible to break it in without long reining it. And I'm given these problem horses that normally are showing tense behaviours. They're probably napping, which is where they bend their neck and learn they can run in the opposite direction to where you want them to go, and things like that. And I say, well, when did this behaviour start? Like, oh, well, you see, I was driving it up the road, the long rein, and then the lorry came around the corner, and the horse got a bit of a fright, and then he jumped up the bank, and he fecked off. No, I didn't say that. That was an Irish word, that one. And all the rest of it. It makes no sense. A, you're in a very dangerous position behind the horse, where even top horse trainers have been kicked and killed. B, it takes a long time to release. So even if I release the instant the horse shows the correct response, it's got to travel all the way up to his mouth. Horses tend to bend their necks instead of turning correctly. It's not easy in long reins to use this rein and right up there make that horse's front leg abduct. What they tend to do is bend their neck and turn like that. So if I have him going along nicely in long reins, I'm going to have to retrain that anyway once I get on board, because that is not how I want a dressage or jumping horse to turn. If they run off in long reins, you've either got two options. You either start holding on. I guess you could run with them, but eventually you're either going to get tired or let go. So you either try and stop them, or you just let them go. If you let them go, all sorts of bad stuff can happen. And if you keep applying pressure, I can put way more pressure on here on the ground than I could ever apply under saddle. So if he's already learned to put his nose on his chest, open his mouth and run through 30 kilos of pressure, my 4 kilos of maximum pressure on board is not going to stop him, because he's already learnt to run through high pressures. So I think, like anything, done well, it's not an issue. But when things go wrong, and the potential for disaster, particularly in amateur hands, and I would consider myself very amateur when it comes to long reining a horse, the potential for disaster is huge. So if you're doing it to take your horse and show it things, lead it in hand to do it, or pony it off another horse. So you've got some control. I might be up on another horse, like down the beach for the first time, and I'll just tow this one along on a lead rope. But I've got way more control than if I was long reining it. So it's just being able to, you don't want to have to reteach anything when you're training them. It's much simpler for the horse if you just say, these are all the rules. This one's slow down, that one's go faster, that one's step left and that one's step right. And that's why I don't introduce the leg yielding in the breaking in process. Normally after about a month under saddle, we'll teach them leg yield, but it's not something they need at the beginning. So I just do the absolute basics we need to be able to get you out and about and seeing things and meeting other horses and going to a showgrounds or whatever you're going to do. So yeah, I've got other reasons, but that's the main ones. So, and again, you know, like I say, done well. I'm not saying you should never do it. You just got to be cautious and know the risks involved in doing it.